Blog Talk Radio.
Good evening, everyone. Welcome to show number. Okay, hang on here. I have something running in my background here. This is just getting to be ridiculous. And then we still have a tune playing in the background here. My God, BTR. This just goes to show you, it doesn't matter how hard you plan, there will be problems. So that was playing at low volume the whole time. Meanwhile, I heard a different song over it. Wow, BTR, you are just spectacular. Well, I'm not even going to bother playing anything now. We're here. Everybody knows we're here. Thank you for enduring that start. Another spectacular start, courtesy of Blog Talk Radio. Remember, I pay for this. Don't ask me why. This is the fourth show out of 5 on the first annual MMM Live on the 5 Internet Radio Marathon. This platform is known as The View Up Here. I am Canadian Glenn. It's been one hell of a day. But now, this evening, I have 3 guests. 3 guests who all can speak with great authority on the movement, Anonymous. 2 of them have managed to dial in. Whether that's another TR issue, I don't even want to speculate at this point. But I will bring on the people that we do have here. Free Matt DeHart has been a large campaign, not only for Anonymous, but it's working its way into the general consciousness. Is Anonymous responsible for that? Yeah, you could say so, to a large extent. But regardless of that this op wears, it is part of a much bigger problem. And tonight we have with us Matt's mother, Leann DeHart. Good evening, Leann. Welcome to the show.
Oh, good evening. Thank you for having me.
Oh, it is my pleasure. It is my pleasure to have you on. Now, while we are introducing people, I will bring on a legendary human rights lawyer and activist, a previous guest to this show and many others. He definitely has a great deal to say about this subject, Mr. Stanley Cohen.
Hey, how are you, folks?
Good evening. Welcome
to
the show, sir.
Thank you so very, very much. Thank you so much. Your other guest is not only the mother of someone who's been targeted by the government for political persecution, but happens to be a dear friend of mine who was one of my closest pen pals when I was in prison myself.
Likewise.
And, the funny part about it is, we were writing for a while, and she was, sending me these incredible drawings and paintings and artwork until all of a sudden the light went on one day, and I figured out who the hell she was. And I said, "Holy shit, you're Matt's mom." And she said, "Yeah." I just, she was this wonderful person who just started writing and introduced herself, and we chatted and became friends, and we've remained very close and friends. And, hopefully not too long down the road, we'll be able to do a show with her son, Free.
That would be wonderful. We're looking forward to that. We really are.
That would be spectacular, indeed. I agree. That is something for all of us to look forward to. Sue Crabtree from freeanons will be calling in shortly. I find it a little interesting that, Sue made sure that everybody was going to be here and everybody knew what was happening. Yeah, she's the last one to show up. This is one for the ages, this one.
Well, that's what Sue does. Sue stays on top of everyone else, makes sure they are at the appointed hour and at the proper place, and then, listen, a lot of struggling going on in a lot of places.
This is true. We never know what the other factor may be. That's correct. But, Stanley, when I was talking to you before the show, we were kind of going over your direct involvement with different people and different ops that Anonymous has been in over the last 5 years. Mm-hmm. The ones that leap to mind are PayPal 14 and Payback 13. Also, all the efforts that Anonymous has done during Arab Spring.
Mm-hmm.
There seems to be a common thread there, does there not? And that points directly to Matt DeHart as well.
Yeah, look. I see the struggle today worldwide as anti-colonialist, and it has a very large umbrella that sweeps within it lots of movements and lots of people of diverse backgrounds and politics, and from many different venues and locations and backgrounds and skills. But ultimately, it's about, as in the case with Matt, and other political prisoners, it's about people who refuse to go silently into the night, and people who believe that they not only have an opportunity but an obligation to play an active role in trying to make the world that is theirs to occupy, for lack of a better word, less anonymous. One that's driven by passion and justice and commitment and truth and principle. And so whether it's the work that I've done with Anonymous directly in terms of, allegedly Anonymous with PayPal 14 and Payback 13, or the role that it's alleged to have play in the Arab Spring in general and events in Palestine, as with the case with Matt and his mother and so many other millions worldwide, it's about truth and justice and dignity and principle.
And there can never be enough people on the side of that.
No.
Absolutely.
Now, the only shame is we're lacking two people on November 8th in the United States. Neither one fall into that category.
No, definitely not. I mean, me being outside the United States, we do get a little different picture of what's happening down there. Not a whole lot different, but a little bit. We're allowed that, I guess. We're not as directly watched as you within the United States, but it's so indicative of what this system has become. And, I mean, like, Leann, the Canadian government as well, did you and your family and Matt absolutely no favors. And there were those in Canada that were trying to draw attention to it and saying, hey, this is bullshit. What's going on? But of course, unfortunately, the Canadian government, quote unquote, played ball. Do you see any difference in different countries, Leann, for what's going on, or is everybody reading from the same script?
Well, when we were in Canada, I'll tell you what we didn't feel, and maybe it's happening, and maybe it's a kind of naivete, but we didn't feel like somebody had their eyeball on you the whole time. And I do have to say, even if they were very professional about it. It has not been the case on this side of the border, and we could tell by some of the Canadian law enforcement that they were they may not have said it directly, but they were very good in letting us know that there was an outside pressure to what they were doing.
Interesting.
Yeah, when we left, go ahead, I'm sorry.
Oh, no, I was just going to say, I guess this is something that you're really not going to know until you're in the situation.
Well, exactly. And I know when we crossed over the border, it was very interesting because normally you don't have such high-ranking officials, at least on the U.S. side, watching you as you're coming through. And it was noted that no one really wanted to take charge of us or talk to us, so they let the Canadians handle it all. And as we left the country, I remember one of the Canadian law enforcement grabbed my hand and said, "We're so very sorry to see you go, and please give Matt all of our best." Yeah, I felt pretty, I felt like some of them had their hands tied, and they would have liked to have seen a different outcome.
Interesting. I just want to say that Sue has joined us. Good evening, Sue.
Good evening.
Sue?
Here I
am. There you are. Welcome.
Thank you. It's so nice to talk to you again.
Lovely to have you. We've just basically gotten underway, so, just fit in whenever you like. I mean, it is nice as a Canadian to hear that there was a little bit of humanity in Canadian law enforcement regarding Matt and regarding your family, but at the end of the day, I guess it didn't matter, but, this does lead to the question, is everybody on the same script? And the experience you just said kind of leads me to believe, yes, they are. What do you think, Stanley?
Well, look, I've had the benefit, for lack of a better word, of seeing it from both sides because, as you know, for decades I represented a ton of North American Indians in general, in particular Mohawks, and on both sides of the so-called border. So I've dealt with Canadian law enforcement. There's something called the International Border Enforcement Task Force, which everyone knows about metadata-based work now, and everyone knows about the surveillance industry, and everyone knows about what the spooks are doing and not. But I bet, interestingly enough, has remained relatively under the radar screen. And it is a mutual aid compact between law enforcement in Canada and the United States where agents cross the border regularly to work together on cases of common interest. And I'm not talking about just extradition. I'm talking about investigations, surveillance, debriefings, meetings. I've been involved in some of those. And I bet has functioned very nicely, efficiently, and effectively to further law enforcement, much more so for the U.S. and Canada, because while most people are desperately fighting to avoid extradition, and for very good reason, from Canada to the United States, I've had a lot of clients desperate to be extradited from the United States to Canada, because when it comes to issues of trials, punishments, sentences, the process itself is far more humane in general in Canada, certainly than the United States. I've had the opportunity as a defendant in both countries to taste it as well, not just as a lawyer. But this I have to say, and I'm glad, Leann, that someone showed you some compassion and some decency, but it's something that I've seen, forever in international cases where people at the last minute, having made the wrong decision, having refused to stand up, having refused to resist and lost, want to feel good at the end of the day. So and I'm not suggesting that this particular agent or officer was not being honest, was not showing a sign of humanity and love and support, but I've come across it so many times where people play the game and at the end of the day step out and say, we're really sorry to see this result. And the bottom line is, if you were so sorry to see this result in the first place, you shouldn't have allowed it to become reality.
That's the truth.
Canada is interesting in terms of law enforcement for other respects too. I mean, the Constitution itself is now only, I guess, 40 years old. Certainly in terms of criminal law and protections and things like that, it's a very different system. I did, in general, find Canadian law enforcement over the years that I handled cases to be much more considerate, much less abusive, much less result-oriented in general. And that also varied based upon the province that you were fighting in. The worst province that I came across throughout Canada was in Quebec. Ontario was great. I've done some work out in the west coast of Canada, and law enforcement was fairly compassionate and decent, and not necessarily result-oriented. So it's not terribly different than the United States in that regard, although we are now so systemically corrupt and so institutionally wed to results and not justice that we can't even recall a day in the United States when investigations, arrests, prosecutions were focused at all on justice or rights of the accused.
Yeah, that does seem to be the factor, especially since these exorbitant budgets are based on results, not justice.
Yeah.
Everything is quantified. Sue, where do you weigh in on this? I mean, from your viewpoint, does it even matter to you what country people are in that freeanons stand up for? Like, is that just a fact that really doesn't matter?
It really doesn't matter what country they're in. We're supporting some in Italy, France. Obviously, we were supporting them in Australia. It doesn't matter where they are. It seems that no matter what country they're in, they have their own method of making people, just isolating them in their own torturous ways. Italy is denying, has folks on house arrest, denying even allowing them to see their friends and some family members. And they've been that way for a long time now. So it doesn't seem to matter. Every country has their own means of torture.
And I guess maybe it depends on what they can constitutionally and in the public eye get away with. And that's also got to be something that, as Leann said, there's a palpable difference. I think part of the issue she spoke to is that in Canada, the Canadian public would simply not be okay with a lot of the methods that are regularly employed in the United States. And I'm sure you could speak to that too, Stanley.
Well, look, it's when it comes to certain kind of cases, it really becomes a difference without a distinction. When you are talking about political cases, when you are talking about prosecutions that involve what governments perceive as challenges to their legitimacy or their authority, when you're talking about cases that trigger the worst in Islamophobia, that trigger the worst in the surveillance industry, it's a difference without a distinction. United States, we've had a head start of 300 years of torture and abuse and violation of fundamental human rights and intimidation and corruption. And I mean, the perfect example is just the events of the last few days. And I'm not supporting either of these candidates, but the perfect example being the most powerful law enforcement agency in the United States, perhaps the world, insinuating itself into the midst of an electoral campaign, a process down to its last 11 days, by engaging in partisan politics, I've called it in the piece that I've recently written in some discussions, nothing short of a coup by the FBI. So, I mean, it's a completely different topic that I've raised, but I think it's indicative of the issue that you've just raised, Glenn, and that Sue spoke about, and Leann has spoken about, that in the 21st century, when you show up on the radar screen of the government, of the state, of those that control the power, if you are a political person, if you are a political prisoner, if you are someone who is challenging the status quo, it is a very vicious, a very brutal, a very evil criminal justice system, no matter whether you're in Italy, Canada, or the United States.
Well, I think that cannot be disputed, and of course you have perspective to make that claim. Leann, I understand, at the end of the day, it really doesn't matter. As Stanley kind of alluded to, whether that Canadian law enforcement official was sincere or not, the bottom line is, what did they do to stand up to what they told you was so wrong? What did they actually do to change it? And, basically at the end of the day, nothing except apologize after the fact. I mean, it's perhaps, I understand when you say it's comforting to a certain degree, but, what does it make in a difference of the price of rice in China? Absolutely nothing. At this point in time, with Matt, are you seeing any movement from either Bureau of Prisons or prosecution to be more reasonable, or are they sticking to their one position and hell or high water, that's it?
Oh, that's the narrative. Because if once you've been labeled, once you've been smeared, and I'm finding, I think I told you earlier before the show, I'm finding more and more people who are coming out and connecting with me. The same thing has been happening to them, and we knew it was. We knew this wasn't happening in a vacuum. They know that in order to destroy somebody's credibility and not listen to anything they say, this is the easiest and most effective way to destroy a person's character. And yes, it's based on nothing, but it's because the government says this is what it is and this is what we're going to do, and they don't pay attention to the Constitution. As far as I'm concerned, the whole court system is a farce. It's an absolute farce. And you don't know that. Most people, at least most people that I'm associated with, don't know that until they're in the midst of it, and they see that it's an enormous bad joke on the American people. It really is. It's a bad joke. It's very sickening and very disturbing. And what I can say is, in all of this, I mean, Matt's could be in a lot worse place. He shouldn't be in prison at all, but he could be in a lot worse place with a lot more time, as some folks we know. The results when he gets out are not pretty to look at. They're rather frightening. His conditions, he's got some very severe conditions, no internet for 10 years. He's possibly, we think, mandatory medical treatment, whatever that means. That's the scary part. And he's listed on a sex offender registry, and we just found out, I think, under this current administration, what they want to do is anybody who applies for a passport, they want to tag them. And just reminds me of things in the past. They want to tag them as, a sex offender so that other countries will see on their passport and they won't be allowed to travel. And it's very demeaning, it's cruel, it's hostile, and it grieves me, and I look and I see what's my son's future going to be like, under these conditions.
Yes, that does seem extremely arbitrary and unconcerned with detail and fact, because anybody who knows about Matt's case understands that the entire premise of the sexual computer crime allegations is not paying attention. I mean, in my opinion, this was just another ploy of the FBI. It is a way that they use to manipulate people into positions. I mean, even in the private business world, we've all heard the stories about things being put on someone's hard drive. And, it happens. It's reality. But suddenly, because if that was the truth here, the truth that can be admitted to, that means the FBI did it. So we just can't go there, it seems. But that is very harsh. And again, as Stanley said, they put this little tag on him, and every other NATO member, everybody who gets foreign aid from the U.S., they will all be compelled to play out the role that the U.S. expects from that labeling. Is that pretty much what the result will be?
I think the FBI has more kiddie porn than anybody I've ever seen or heard of. They've got it all, and they use it. And they use it to discredit people, and they used it to discredit Matt. And I've seen my share of people saying that, he had child porn. Since when do we listen to that? I know of a 17-year-old kid who was caught up in all of that, coordinated by the FBI. The FBI has more child porn than anybody, and they'll use it the way they want to use it, and they use it to discredit any activist, and they'll do their best to discredit people by, he had child porn on there, and everybody knows how people feel about that. But they've got it all.
Let me interrupt one. Anyone who has any question about what the FBI is not only willing to do, but will do, the last week, the events in the United States shows exactly that there's nothing beyond the pale. I mean, we now have a situation where the FBI is now forced to investigate itself because a deactivated Twitter account that it's had for years and not used suddenly has started posting political propaganda. We now have a situation where the head of the FBI has ignored well-settled, well-established regulations which have been in place for decades, specifically to keep the FBI and law enforcement away from elections, from political positioning, from campaigning. So if they are going to ignore that in front of the whole world to see, how much easier is it for them to simply, under cover of darkness, to engage in the very kinds of activity that Leann and Sue are talking about? If they will do this and basically tell the United States to go screw itself and do it publicly and laugh and scoff, how much more vulnerable is everyone else? And what Sue said and what Leann said is 100% correct, especially when it comes to the FBI. It is very much a result-oriented organization. When it concludes that someone has done something, it will do anything necessary to get their pound of flesh. And that involves, look, you're talking about an organization that oversaw COINTELPRO, an intelligence operation 40 years ago, 50 years ago, whatever it may have been, that involved the assassination of activists, the murder of activists. You are talking about an organization which has a history. I mean, it tried to blackmail Martin Luther King. We are talking about an organization that from day one has stopped at nothing to criminalize, to slander, to persecute, and to bury people it believes pose a political opposition to its view, to its agenda. No doubt about it. Kiddie porn, child porn, nothing. In a second. You're talking about an organization that has used cooperators to carry out murders in organized crime cases.
That's a very interesting point you bring up there, that what the FBI is actually engineering for and protecting is not just a law and order issue, but it's a political issue.
Of course. Sure.
And that
the
is
whole
something
persecution of Anonymous, which became very trendy under the Obama administration, was a political decision that was made in the White House because it realized that there was a movement, a growing movement of young women and men of principle, of activists who were committed to exposing U.S. government wrongs, U.S. security and military, so-called military or surveillance industry wrongs, and a political decision was made. Not that this was, we're not talking about cases here involving fraud. We're not talking about cases involving people using, quote unquote, the internet or cyberspace to benefit themselves, but to expose U.S. crimes, U.S. foreign policy, to expose patterns of activity that are criminal themselves. And a political decision was made in the White House that this could not happen. And thus you began to see the first prosecution was probably the one that I had, was PayPal 14, where they dredged out the most benign and absurd federal laws to persecute people when it was really about was sending a message that if you fuck with us, you're going to pay a price. The FBI, this is not just law enforcement. This is enforcing a political agenda. And it's not even unique to whomever may be the director of the FBI or sitting in the White House at the time. It's as long as and as old as the agency. They are about political orthodoxy, and they establish it and they enforce it, and there's nothing they will not do to accomplish that end.
So that is, in fact, their true mission statement. It's not law and order. It's to maintain the political appearance of the state as they see
Absolutely.
fit or as they are instructed to.
Yeah.
Wow.
President picks up the phone. President calls the Attorney General. Attorney General comes to the White House. President says, I have problems with X, Y, or Z. We need to focus on this. Attorney General picks up the phone, calls the head of the FBI, gives him, I was going to say her, but we've never had a female head of the FBI, their marching orders, and off they go.
And in chain of command, no questions are asked. Those are your orders. Carry them out.
Yep, that's it.
Wow.
It's the history of the FBI.
Now, Leann, there we go. I ask you, how much political overtone has been deployed to no end against Matt and against your family? Has it become nothing but a political issue, or is it still some sort of criminal issue?
The criminality is on the government side. It's not on my son's side. And what you said about political, that's exactly what it is. It's a cover-up. That's what it is, pure and simple. It's a cover-up. Don't go there, and because you even looked in that direction, we're just going to crucify you.
And I know it's been very hard for the DeHart family to get any traction, especially in the United States, from corporate media. I mean, there was some very good work done by a reporter at National Post in Canada, but that was the exception. Have you gone through the experience of trying to contact people to help you get the truth out, and they're just simply not interested?
You are exactly right. Before we made our asylum claim, we had contacted everybody and anybody that we thought might be able to help us expose what was going on, and we got doors slammed in our face over and over and over again. And if for nothing else other than media coverage, being in Canada, that was probably the best thing that ever happened. Adrian Humphrey's story broke everything, and then there were people afterwards that came knocking at the door. Holger Stark from Germany, who's also located in D.C. as the correspondent there, did a wonderful story. He actually sat down with Matt and interviewed him personally. So did Adrian at the time. And then the only big U.S. story, and it wasn't huge, but we thought it was, significant considering there was nothing in the U.S., was the story that broke in Newsweek done by Bethany Horn.
So,
and other than small, alternative media outlets, and they've done a good job. There's no one really that will sit down and have a conversation with us.
that is a terrible thing to hear.
What I find fascinating? I don't mean to butt in, but I had to because it makes me so mad. You know what I find so fascinating? I find it so fascinating that people would actually believe that Matt DeHart had one image on his computer and that he's a pedophile or a child molester or whatever else tag you want to put on him. I find that so shocking that people would actually believe that. Back in, I believe it was 2013, when Luke Rudkowski was so vocal about this happening to him. I think the thing that saved him is he became immediately public about this very thing happening to him. In email, he was covering Bilderberg. An email comes to him. Fortunately, he was able to view the email before he downloaded it, or he would have had it on his computer too. And there's dozens more. But yet, the very people who are so against the way our government runs is going to believe, oh, well, we can't do anything. We don't want to talk about this case because there's child porn involved. How do the very people who know the way our government runs, the way the FBI operates, actually believe there was one item on his computer and he downloaded it himself?
I'm going to interject now. The item that they say was on his computer was on a, quote, computer that they finally gave a date and a time when they wouldn't do it for so long. And we had a sales slip for the computer that supposed computer that had that supposed picture on it. We didn't get till like 3 or 4 months later. And so we were like, how does a picture end up on a computer in February when the computer's not bought until May of that year? And, little things like that, and people are like, oops, let's go a different direction now. Let's look at somewhere else now because, we can't use that one. And the whole case is like that. The entire case is like that. It's running and down rabbit holes to find something else because, that just doesn't fit the narrative. They got proof that didn't happen. But when it all, like Glenn said, when it all comes down to the end of the day, none of it mattered. Not a single piece of information mattered. Not one. Not one.
That is scary.
That's just plain sad.
True.
It's this is as a follow-up to what Leann said. I find it interesting that people tend to have selective righteous indignation. They will attach themselves to a case or to an allegation, be offended by government misconduct, be outraged over government misconduct, and then a month later the same agency, the same people, the same agents that they were, and correctly enough, condemning a month, 2 months, 6 months before, suddenly are knights in shining white armor. I think what has to be recalled here, and both Sue and Leann have talked about this, is that if you are in law enforcement, you don't get to pick and choose. You don't get to engage in result-oriented case building. You don't get to engage in using illegal activities to get your man, quote, or your woman, quote. You don't get to pick and choose when you're the good guy or gal or the bad one. You are either consistent or you're a lawbreaker yourself. Now, the fact that Leann has just identified a situation. I mean, I've been doing criminal defense work for 32 years. I can't tell you on how many occasions where you go into a proffer with the government to take a look at information, allegations, and evidence, and you establish very quickly it's not possible, it could not have happened that way, and it raises a significant question, or it should raise a significant question about bad faith by the agency or the agent. And it's like, oh, okay, well, we'll just take that off the table. And rather than putting it in the entire context, and as a prosecutor, saying to yourself, well, look, I've got agents that themselves are putting together a case based upon falsehoods, based upon misconduct, based upon lies, based upon illegal activity, and I need to take a look at this overall picture. They will simply say, okay, then we won't use this evidence, allegations of evidence, and just move on. Because at the end of the day, particularly in political cases, it comes down to silencing opposition, getting the person you're going after, and sending a message to others that if you fuck with us politically, there's a heavy price for you to pay. And that's what all of these cases have in common. You look at what's going on with Larry Love right now. You take a look at what's going on with other so-called extradition matters. You take a look at what's going on throughout the world. And the common thread among all of these cases is the attempt by government to protect themselves, their agenda, their view, and their power. And they will do whatever they can, and they will victimize anyone they can along the way to maintain that power. It really doesn't matter.
And it does seem to be becoming more and more of a single team that plays this game. I mean, there was a time when different nations would say, no, we don't do that shit here. I'm sorry. That may be what you guys do, and if that's what runs your flag up the flagpole because, you're all such patriots and shit, we don't go along with that stuff over here. But that's changing, isn't it? It's getting to be the same everywhere.
Well, what you've got is, it's so interesting, is you've got, as I talked about the International Border Enforcement Task Force, you have all of these marriages that involve not only exchanges of information and exchanges of data and exchanges of technique, but training one another. I mean, you've got Israel, which has one of the most outrageous records in the world when it comes to the use of deadly force, when it comes to the use of torture, when it comes to converting law enforcement into a militarized, quote, fighting force, traveling all over the world right now and dispatching training teams, including the United States, to train American law enforcement in their techniques. I mean, so what does it say? And you're right. Glenn, what it says is, and there's a flip side to this, they rationalize it. Their view of this is this is now an international battle, which requires international cooperation. And they're right. It is an international battle because increasingly we have connected the dots and realized very well that oppression at home and oppression abroad is still oppression, and that the connection between oppression at home and oppression abroad is one. And if you are going to deal for justice or pursue it at home, you have to do it abroad. So they view this now as an international struggle which is also kind of interesting because it was raised a little while ago. Not only are there nations that traditionally say, well, we're not going to engage in that kind of conduct, there are techniques of torture, of isolation, of rendition, of breaking down people's will that for the longest period of time was rejected by countries when other countries engaged in it. But that no longer is the rule. You've got these techniques that I've come across in a host of so-called terrorism cases and international cases where countries just blink while they walk out the door and they let foreign countries engage in activity that they themselves could not engage in, and then they get the benefit of the torture. So there'll be a country abroad that'll torture someone into making a false statement, implicating themselves or building a case against themselves as a result of sleep deprivation and cases of waterboarding, threats to their family. And then, the U.S. government will walk in and take the statement and use it in a courtroom in the United States. And as long as you can't prove that they played an active role or directed it, the evidence is admissible. What does that say about, as you said, Glenn, the internationalization of protecting the political agenda? And that's what it's about.
Then that speaks directly to the CIA rendition program as well. I mean, you look at where these black sites were. Countries like Bulgaria and some of the old Soviet republics. Not exactly human rights torchbearers, but if it's okay there, we'll send him there. They will do what they can do. And then, like you said, Stanley, we'll just come by and pick up the file. Thanks.
Yep.
Wow.
Well,
that's insane.
I opined in a federal courtroom in New York City in a major international terrorism case that the best evidence that my client had no information to share, and the best evidence that my client was not wittingly involved in any terrorism whatsoever, was the fact that a bag was put over his head in Jordan, and within 6 hours of going from Turkey to Jordan, he was on an airplane coming to the United States, and the fact that he wasn't sent to another country, the fact that he wasn't tortured, was the best evidence that he had nothing to give. And everyone sort of looked at me, and without saying a word, they clearly understood and agreed.
Interesting.
And it's simply developing worldwide. And the excuses that we will begin to see with more and more so-called cyberspace prosecutions, with more and more selective enforcement of laws against alleged members of Anonymous, with more and more prosecutions for DDoS and other activity that I consider to be very much, in terms of the United States, protected First Amendment activity, you are beginning to see a convergence of law enforcement technique, a convergence of law enforcement priority, and a convergence of the way the judicial systems of each country looks at each other's activities.
Okay, so Sue, I would ask you, since you deal with so many people under threat from the state in so many different places, is there very much difference in what you see for the way they are treated, the way they are portrayed, the conditions and the treatment that they have to tolerate? Is there much difference, or is it becoming very, we've heard that before? It doesn't matter where it actually is?
Oh, I think we've heard that before. I think it's exactly what Stanley said. It's going to get worse from one country to the next. It's going to get worse. And I think that other countries are starting to follow a disgraceful model that the U.S. has set up for abuse of incarcerated people. I'm thinking specifically, and I have to bring this up because it goes to what Stanley was talking about just a minute ago. I'm thinking about the Marty G. case. I'm sure you're all familiar with it, the DDoS of the Boston Children's Hospital. And he is facing 5 to 25 years in prison for a DDoS. He's also in prison at this time, and he's been on a hunger strike for 30 days. He's lost 30 pounds. And while I commend his action, it's sad because if he thinks this is going to get anybody's attention, it's not. It's going to get media attention, but the government doesn't give a shit. They don't care if he dies in prison because he starved himself to death. They don't care about any of this. So until people start to take note that something is wrong with the way these cases are being prosecuted, something is wrong with our prison system, and until a human rights group or someone stands up and says, you will stop this, it's just getting worse. And I've watched it get worse since 2012 that I can remember. I'm sure Stanley remembers a lot further back than that, but I'm just speaking to the time that I've been involved. It's like I can't believe this is actually happening, but it is, and it's getting worse. And the fact that that they would even consider allowing Lori Love to come to be extradited to the U.S. speaks to the power that the U.S. government has. Otherwise, he would be charged just like Chris Weatherhead, just like Ashley Rhodes from the Payback case. They were charged in their country. They did their time in their country. Suddenly, we're going to bring one here. Yet, there was both. The Payback case was about what took place in the U.S. They lived in the U.K. They were tried in their country. They were put in prison in their country. But this particular time, we're going to bring Lori over here now as the years progress, and other countries want to be the do-boy for the U.S. Here, we're going to extradite someone from their country, pull them from their country, and imprison them here for what could be 99 years. It speaks volumes to how quickly things are changing and worsening.
Well, look, let me interject because, something that Sue just said, resonates so powerfully. For example, in the PayPal 14 case, I remember not long after Aaron committing suicide, we were having a status conference discussion. Some 20-odd lawyers and I think there may have been 3. Now there were 2 federal prosecutors in a conference room, and we were engaged in negotiations to see if we could end this case. Which eventually a year later proved fruitful. And I looked at the chief prosecutor and said, we don't need any more Aarons in this world. I mean, we had some people in the PayPal 14 case who were very vulnerable, were going through some significant problems, had some health problems that were extraordinarily vulnerable in terms of their life, where they were at, their finances, their home, their situation, and I was concerned. And I raised, forget about as a defense attorney, as a human being, the issue of people looking at the tragedy of Aaron. I said, look, we don't need another one of these. And the prosecutor looked at us and said, listen, I've had more than my share of defendants kill themselves. Another one's just another one.
Oh, my.
This came out of the mouth of a senior assistant U.S. attorney in California. And I looked at him, and later on I approached him and said, do you want to, stand up and say you're sorry, apologize, and withdraw this? Think about this? No. Now, was it posturing? Who knows? But to even utter that word, that phrase, and so when Sue talks about people going on hunger strikes, and I've had Palestinians on hunger strikes in the 1990s, going back a long time ago. And this was before forced feeding became the way now that's increasingly becoming popular throughout the world, where there were actually discussions underway about how do we put an end to this? Because, and I'm not suggesting the criminal justice system was any fairer then or was any more focused on issues of humanity and principle and justice, but we've reached a point where I just think law enforcement as a unit, and I don't separate between whether it's the Department of Justice, the FBI, the IRS, the DEA, or the town cop, have become result-oriented worldwide. That once they target an individual, it no longer matters how you get that individual. And the questions of guilt or non-guilt has nothing to do with it. It's politically driven, it's politically motivated, and it's typically politically resolved.
And all the people who play along with it, and all the people that go along with it. Just an example, in Matt's case, they did bring up that there was a chat log, a very innocent chat log, and the officer, the detective in charge of the case, manipulated the chat log, actually wrote in names, changed the verbiage, added things, and manipulated the entire chat log, doctored it up. And when that was brought up, the comment that was made is good faith.
Yeah.
My goodness.
Yeah.
My goodness.
It's interesting because I've done classic, criminal defense cases where, and serious ones, needless to say. I mean, I had it doesn't matter who, a guy in a major drug case years ago who, I'm not talking about farming out. I'm talking about himself killed 19 people. And ended up getting an 8-year jail sentence in total. Because what it comes down to is what you can give the government. So the government is used to dealing with individuals that are pursuing, many of them, who knows how many. We're talking about, I don't want to be accused of making stereotypical descriptions or statements here. Government law enforcement, in particular federal law enforcement, is very much conditioned to dealing with people who they view as quote-unquote predators, who put their own self-interest ahead of society's in their mind. And they cut deals, and people cooperate, and people become snitches, and people point fingers, and people lie, and people cheat, and people plant evidence. So when you come to political prisoners, when you come to people that have either made a decision to break an unjust law or to challenge it, or have not but yet have been accused of it, and are doing it from a perspective of principle and commitment to change and confronting, speaking power to truth, the government has no idea how to deal with it. No idea, clueless, because they're just not used to dealing with people in their world that they view in the same light. And that's why in all of these cases where you talk about 99-year sentences, when you talk about 15-year sentences, when you talk about 10, 12, 14-year sentences for so-called hacking cases, in the government's mind, this is sending a message. And it's a message being sent to the next generation of cases, and they could care less about justice. They could care less about being arbitrary. They could care less about being punitive. They could care less about being overzealous. They could care less about their own institutional and systemic corruption. All they're concerned about is enforcing a geopolitical dogma, and that's it.
Has the biggest tool to keeping everyone in line, every spoke on the wheel, to keep this system eating its own, what has become the lever for this? Is it simply the advancement of the individual and they swallow their moral code and look the other way, or is there something else involved? Because I'm just having a problem understanding how there is enough people to make this evil system continue to expand and become even more callous as time goes on. How does this happen?
I don't think there is a moral code left anymore. I mean, to say that we even were trying to have a moral code of some sort, I don't believe that we have a moral code. I believe that we threatening to put Lori Love in prison for life in the U.S., threatening somebody over a DDoS with 25 years in prison. How do we have a moral code? We don't have one. The U.S. government will do what they want to whom they want. They will frighten young activists with life in prison. They did it to Hammond. They did it to Barrett. You're going to get life in prison. And so plea deals are accepted. And they feel that, Carmen Ortiz is the one who prosecuted Aaron Schwartz. She's now prosecuting the Marty Gottsfeld case. This woman should have been prosecuted herself, but yet our lack of a moral code allows her to continue to do her horrible work. She's treacherous. And we have no moral code left. And until someone stands up and says we need to start recentering on a moral code of some sort, this is just going to continue to get worse. Who gets 5 to 25 years for a DDoS? Okay, so it's getting worse. I'm watching it just over the last several years just get worse and worse. Tim French just took a plea deal and got 43 months in prison. He's in Illinois at this time. He was plucked from Tennessee and dropped in Illinois and was threatened with 7 to 15 years in prison, accepted a plea deal for 43 months. He's 22 years old. This is ridiculous. All these cases they're just getting worse, and the threats are getting worse.
Well, one of the things, I'm sorry.
No, go ahead. I was just going to say, I'll guarantee Stanley says we have no moral code.
Well, one of the things is, and this is what I find so fascinating about, the call to revolution from the left, the right, or in between over the U.S. presidential election. Look, the criminal justice system in the United States, and I suspect the criminal justice system through most of the world, it really doesn't matter one way or another unless you have an incredibly proactive president who's willing to challenge, to shake up, and break the process, is run by career bureaucrats who embrace and enforce the same procedures, the same attitude, the same mindset, no matter who the president is. They sit in their positions of power for 20 years, 25 years until they retire. They work their way up the system. They accumulate more and more power and authority. There is less, the higher you go, the less checks and balances there are. So when I hear these discussions about a new president coming in with a new attorney general or a new director of the FBI who is going to change things, I laugh because I know damn well a guy like Comey didn't just show up one day and become the director of the FBI. This is someone who has spent his entire career either working in law enforcement, working as an assistant U.S. attorney, working as a U.S. attorney, working as an acting attorney general, working as a case agent, or working for Wall Street. So, and he's not sui generis. He's not alone. He's not isolated. He's not one of a kind. We are talking about a structural defect that could care less about a moral code, but is simply moving bodies. And the only thing that changes are the political priorities. And increasingly in the United States, the political priorities, as elsewhere, when we're talking about what I consider to be and what we all consider to be political persecutions, is to silence and punish and to incarcerate political dissidents and to send a message to the next generation of potential dissidents and activists. This is what we have waiting for you. So you've got this marriage between the use of law enforcement to impose political orthodoxy and it being imposed by career bureaucrats that spend 20 or 25 years pushing bodies and counting victories. Morality, when I was in law school, I'll never forget, 1,000 years ago, I raised the issue of morality in a particular class on a particular issue. And a very famous professor looked at me and said, Mr. Cohen, if you're interested in morality, leave the law school. The seminary is up the street. Sums it up.
Interesting. I guess that is a no sugar-coating reality statement. Wow.
I mean,
okay,
look, when you talk about morality in the United States, I mean, I get a kick out of it because every once in a while, I'll hear someone, and I don't want to spread this out, but a Zionist will begin to talk about the Hamas charter that drive Israel to the sea and to kill Jews, et cetera, et cetera. And I have to remind people that you go to Washington, D.C., and in the Capitol, under this enormously beautiful rotunda, or within one, under glass, is the foundational document of the United States of America, which calls African Americans, which calls slaves 3/5 human beings. So let's from day one, the concept of justice, the concept of humanity, the concept of a just system of laws and enforcement has never been much more than a myth in this country. We're talking about a country that as recently as 50 years ago still had bathrooms for, quote, colored people. We're talking about a country that we still haven't been able to pass an equal rights amendment for women. We're talking about a country where women were denied the right to vote for, 100, 150 years? So whenever I hear these discussions about lofty ideals and the American exceptionalism, particularly when it comes to our criminal justice system, I simply suggest people to take a look in the mirror and take a look in the library and see where we've come and to see how far we've not come and how far we must still go.
That is an excellent point, and it is not one you're going to hear on network within the next millennium. But, I mean, I hear you say stuff like that, Stanley, and this is exactly what makes me laugh being north of the 49th parallel when we see the orange retard saying, "Make America great again." When the fuck was it great? Read your history, man.
Well, in his mind, it was great when we had plantations. In his mind, it was great when we had a system where undocumented aliens were working for 12 cents an hour instead of $15 an hour. In his mind, America was great when we had Asians building a railroad system that went from coast to coast on land that was stolen by Native Americans.
I guess so. Now, all three of you here, or if you want to finish on that, Stanley, go ahead, because I was going to change the direction.
And again, I'm not suggesting that Hillary Clinton I do not support Hillary Clinton. I don't spend a lot of time beating up Hillary Clinton because there are enough people doing that job and doing just fine at it. So it's the folks that are not beating up on Trump, and I'm a New Yorker. And I've known of this guy and known this guy for decades as a New York City guy. So yeah, I'm focused on him, but it's a distinction without a difference when you come to this election. They are both unfit. They are both uniquely suited for the perpetuation, just in different ways, of the status quo ante. And it's just a question of who's got more experience in the torture chamber. That's all.
Wow, that is a frightening truth, I would say. Now, what I wanted to start on was all three of you have intimate knowledge that I am sure you wish you did not have of what happens to the individuals, the people that are subjected to these programs by the political deep state. How does it affect them? And is it really beyond the comprehension of anybody to get it unless they get thrown into that hole? Like, most people will stop the odd time and consider it when there's a very poignant article or something in the 30-second news cycle, and they say, wow, yeah, that sucks. And then right back to watching Idol. But I'd like to ask each of you, what is the price that this system puts on people? How severe is it, and how motivating is that everybody else should get off their ass and either become vocal or assist those in this situation, or find people like-minded and band together to try and get something done. Now, I don't really know who wants to start about the results they've seen from this system. Maybe I'm not going to push you, Leann. That's for sure. You can share with us what you'd like. But, just tell the people that really don't understand the system of what this has done to your son.
Oh my! And it's really sad because I've had conversations with people, and I either get a roll of the eyes, or you're exaggerating, or there's that sorry look in their eyes, like sucks to be you. So sorry that happened to you. Oh gosh, I got to go get my groceries, or some folks that had been my friends for a long time are scared to death. They've known me for a long time, and they do believe that this kind of stuff happens, and they are no longer my friends. They feel very uncomfortable to have any kind of relationship with me, and that's really sad. But in the case of my son paid the ultimate price. I mean, somebody took my kid and they tortured him, and they damaged him, and they smeared him, and they threw him in prison. And we've lost everything. Our family has lost all of our funds and everything we ever had. It's just stuff, but, I mean, we've had to start all over again, and it's not that we dwell on it every single minute of the day or even daily, but we do know. I mean, I look at John Kiriakou, years later, poor John gets yanked in and indicted and has to take a plea and thrown into prison, and that's always hangs over our head. Maybe, I'm not sure that everybody knows, my son would have gone to prison for the 70 or 90 years they threw at him because he's very idealistic, and he said, I didn't do this, and I don't care if I have to spend the rest of my life in prison. What encouraged or coerced my son to take a plea is they were going to put Paul and I in prison too. And I didn't find this out till after the fact, when we actually had a good chat where nobody was listening in to us, and that's a daily thing. We don't say certain things over the phone. We don't write things in letters. It's when we meet and we whisper to each other in hopes that with the noise around us when we go visit them that, they're not hearing everything that we say. But I didn't find out till afterwards when Matt told me I did this because I do not want my parents in prison. And, just yank my heart out and, throw it out in the street. But, I mean, it's a consideration for us. We think about when are they going to change their mind? When are they going to get, one day decide they just want to be more vindictive than usual and say, okay, let's grab up these other two and toss them in prison too, just for good measure. So, that we think about that. Someone asked me the other day, oh, do you think you're being surveilled? I chuckled and said, we're all being surveilled. I just might be a little bit more than you are at this point in time. So, I mean, there's no illusions. I know we're being watched, and I know we have to be, good little boys and girls, and I always have to be careful of what I say or do because of the ramifications it will have on my son and how vindictive they want to be. So, it's like living in a nightmare that just won't ever go away. And you just kind of learn to function within that nightmare.
We shouldn't have to live like that.
No, nobody
should ever have to live like that.
They pulled that same shit with Barrett Brown, threatened to put his mother in prison. They can't even come up with a new one. They just keep using the same ones. It's recycling the same bullshit. They did it with Barrett. They did it with them. Their threats, they're never ending. Their use of kiddie porn to discredit an activist. That's been the hardest thing to try to get mail to our guys that are in jail. And when I see someone say, oh, well, but Matt had child porn, you believe the government? Do we do that? I thought part of our job was to question everything. I guess we don't suddenly have to do that because it involves child porn. It's ridiculous. The minute you see it, you should start to question the entire case. But this goes to show right here that the government is not beneath threatening your parents. If they get what they want here, we'll throw your parents in jail if you don't do what we tell you. So it's It's old, and it's so standard that they'll do whatever they want until they get what they want. And it's sad that other countries are following suit, but they seem to be, in my opinion.
Wow.
Well, I may be of the panel uniquely situated to talk about this because not only have I been a defense attorney for 32 years and an activist for 45, but I went to prison. So, there's two different perspectives, and I agree with everything that Leann and Sue have said. It's just, there's two different approaches I take to this issue when I'm asked about it. I routinely hear about, and again, I'm going to use what's the lunacy of the Trump-Clinton debacle as an example. I hear people, whether they support one, support the other, support neither, that are demanding that law enforcement break laws, break rules, do all sorts of things that they are barred from doing because they want to get the person they don't like. And I got to tell you, the numbers of times over the course of 32 years that I've sat in my office, whether as a public defender or not in political cases because they get it, but in classic criminal defense cases, particularly in middle-class white families, when people will walk in and be truly offended that the government would engage in misconduct, that the government would lie, that the government would cheat, that the government would steal, that the government would do anything it could do to get a husband, a wife, a son, a daughter, a brother, or a sister, they're offended. I had no idea is the first thing they say. How can they do this? Why can they do this? How do they get away with this? And lately I've been having that discussion with people that, and I've been reminding folks that you can't give carte blanche to law enforcement just because you don't like a person and you are willing to give law enforcement the free pass to break the rules. Because, God forbid, it could happen to you in a month or a year, and then you're going to look up and be stunned over this. So, that's as the defense attorney. As someone who was targeted by the federal government of the United States for more than, 14 years actively that we knew of, by a half dozen different agencies. And I'm not going to really go into why I elected to dispose of, my matter the way that I did. But suffice it to say, the government in every case, and mine was not different, begins to drag family members and loved ones into situations. And that's the end of it. That's what they always do. They've done that in tons of cases as a defense attorney. I've seen it in political cases. But, Glenn, when you started, your first question was the impact and effect on the people in prison. Listen, I'm a 60-plus-year-old defense attorney and an activist for 45 years. I've been busted in Canada for seditious conspiracy. I've been arrested 5 times in the state. I went to prison for 9 months, a federal prison camp in the United States. I've been through the system. I've been to DX. I've been to maximum security prisons. I know what it's like to have bail set. I know what it's like to have bail set on you. I was in prison in the Partenay in Canada. I was in for 3 weeks in a federal prison in Canada during OCA or at the end of OCA. It really doesn't matter how strong you are. It really doesn't matter how experienced you are. Prisons, and there is a huge strike still underway in the United States, an inmate strike. You are never the same once you are in prison. Because whether you are there for 9 months, 10 months, or 10 years, there is a survival mechanism that kicks in. You relatively quickly find out how you have to comport yourself in your own mind, in your own environment, while there and with your family on the outside to survive. And it causes you, no matter how strong you are, no matter how disciplined you are, no matter how experienced you are, to make some pretty profound choices in your life. It really doesn't matter whether it's 6 months, 9 months, 5 years, or 20 years. The government knows very well, and it's part of it's part of the punishment quotient in the United States. They know very well at least they view what is necessary to break the will, to break the spirit, to reduce everyone to a common denominator, to deal with everyone as if you're there because of poor impulse control. So it impacts people. And perhaps the worst part about this, and I don't want, this may upset, Leann, perhaps the worst part about the entire prison experience, whether it's 9 months or 9 years, is the person who is in prison is powerless to do anything to help loved ones, to support loved ones, to give them comfort on the outside. There's nothing you can do about it. So you get your phone calls, and you get your letters, and you get your visits, and you try to keep a strong face, and you try to smile, and you try to assure everyone it's fine. But what eats at you the most and the worst is the fact that you have loved ones that are going home without you, that are going through family crises, that are going through financial crises, that are going through personal crises, that are going through health and emotional crises, and there is nothing at all that you can do about it. And ultimately, that is the linchpin of the criminal justice system in this country, is to isolate people. So you not only take their quote-unquote liberty, but you set up a process which even makes it more difficult to find support and to give support, emotional or otherwise, with loved ones. So they control the numbers of visits, and they control the length of visits, and they control the numbers of emails, and they control the numbers of phone calls. And they basically reduce you to a common denominator, knowing full well that you got to figure out how to survive. And that's what you do.
So it's a matter of physical, emotional, and mental isolation. And every factor of that is beyond the prisoner's control.
And for those that don't have the ability or the capacity to find a balance which allows them to survive, they end up in the SHU, in special housing units. They end up in communication housing units. They end up in further isolation. They end up losing good time. They end up, there is this whole process within the criminal justice system in the United States which is designed to guarantee failure, because it's an enormously economically powerful incentive. Recidivism is very important in the U.S. in the criminal justice system in the United States. So rather than facilitating prison sentences that are, forget about length of sentence, forget about that, and forget about the fact that people end up going to prison for nonviolent offenses and generally complaintless crimes, while you are in prison itself, whether it is a camp, a low, a medium, or a maximum, the Bureau of Prisons, in terms of federal prisons, by design, operates under the worst set of circumstances. It's not intended, it's not facilitated, it's not designed to support families, to support, and I hate this word, reintegration. What Leann said about Matt is so true. When you're talking about someone who's gone to prison 3, 4, 5, 6 years, when they get out, reintegration emotionally and mentally and physically and love-wise is an incredibly daunting task, no matter how long you've been down, as we say. It's difficult enough, but they go to the next step. They build tripwires and difficulties into the process that makes it more complicated, makes it more painful. They add, yellow stars to wear around your neck. They add designations. They do things to limit your ability to integrate back with your family in your community. It's not by accident. It's by design. I mean, we are, in the United States, we are less than 5% of the world population, and we have more than 25% of the world's prisoners.
Yes. And the other factor that you brought up that I wish more people would think about, since the propensity of the criminal system, especially in the United States, is to come down the hardest on the people who have the least means to fight it, is that the entire prison industry in the United States is a huge money-making vehicle. There's
Oh,
not
sure.
enough people that don't realize that. I think
Amen.
you mentioned recidivism. If everyone who was convicted in the United States did their one bit and never went back, this system would go broke, would it not?
Well, it's interesting. 1984-6082. That my number, 1984-6082. That's my federal prison number. They are
sounds
so
right.
They are so conditioned. Yeah, they are so conditioned to expect and in fact, to look forward to recidivism. That number is mine for the rest of my life. No one else can get that until I die. It sits in a shelf.
Just that
you're talking
message
about
in
a system.
itself.
Yeah. You're talking about a system that when I walked out of a camp and walked out of the maximum security prison up top, whatever money you have in your account, they give you a debit card, and I've kept my debit card, and they put a picture of you on the debit card that is your mugshot.
Oh my God.
So you walk out with a debit card. You've come out of prison, whether it's been 9 months or 9 years, with $460 in a debit card, an account, and you go into a store to buy something or to try to get a phone or open an account, and they ask to see your debit card, and what do they see? They see you in a jail uniform and a mugshot. What does that say about the sensitivity of quote-unquote reintegration when you're coming out of prison? They're going to say that it's, quote, for security reasons. Well, it's nonsense. If someone needs to see my picture or Matt's picture or someone else's picture, when you leave that facility, you're no longer in your jumpsuit. You have a camera. Take a picture of me in my civilian clothes, put it on my debit card, and thank you, goodbye. And if you're worried that I pose a quote-unquote security threat, such that you have to put a mugshot of me or Matt or everyone else on a debit card, what does that say about your criminal justice system and quote-unquote rehabilitation?
It says it is non-existent. It is nothing but boilerplate. They understand that they don't do it just by those actions.
Yeah.
That's what I get.
I remember when I drove up to Ohio and I picked up Wormer when he got out of prison, and we were driving him back to connect with someone else who was going to drive him all the way home, because I felt that someone who had been 2 years in prison didn't need to take a bus home alone. He needed to have people around him who cared. So we drove up to get him, and we stopped at several restaurants on the way, fast food or whatever, because we figured he hadn't had it in so long we would treat him. And you know what he said to me? He said, it's so hard, I forget that I don't have to ask to use the bathroom. And he was standing there waiting to use the bathroom, but didn't realize he didn't have to ask. He had to remember that he didn't have to ask to go to the bathroom. And between him and Stanley, I think they had the most, their messages were the most upbeat of anyone. And you think that they're doing their time and they're doing it the best way they can and whatnot, but their upbeat way does not mean that they're actually having an easier time of it than anybody else.
No, and when I write a lot of them, that's what comes out in their letters. It comes out, do people still know about me? Do they still care about me? And it just breaks your heart.
That is a punishment that goes beyond the actual criminal sentence. That is beyond anything that any sort of punitive system should be allowed to do, because, as I'm hearing here, this exists for everyone convicted and sent to prison. But yet, where does it ever appear that is part of the of the statute to punish. They just put length of sentence, amount of crime. That's all they ever say. But it goes far beyond that. Far beyond that.
Considering what Matt's going to have to deal with when he gets out of prison, his time has just started. When his time ends is not when he gets out of prison. That's just another aspect of his punishment that will continue on. And being tagged a sex offender, seriously, I hope somehow that this family can find their way to somehow getting that removed, because it's ridiculous. And I have a hard time with the entire case against Matt. It's all fabricated. There is no way anyone could possibly believe this nonsense. And for Matt to feel, have they forgotten about me? Only Stanley can attest to how that must feel. Have they forgotten about me? You know, Stanley, when you were in prison, did you ever feel like people forgot about you?
No. You see, look. I went into prison knowing I was going to be in prison roughly 10 months. Knew that from day one. I was designated immediately as essentially monitored inmate because of my persona and my background and my expertise and, and the 162 requests from journalists when I had walked in the door to interview me. And what essentially monitored inmate means is that no decision about my, quote, security, about my placement, about work, about release, about discharge, or anything was made on a local level. Every aspect of my incarceration was made by Washington, D.C. or Texas. So I went in understanding, look, I'm going to be here. I'm going to be here for 10 months. I know why I'm here. This is not an open-ended situation. I've been to prisons all over this country. I was prosecuted for sedition in Canada and was in prison for a short period of time. So I never had the problem. In fact, by design, I told most of my family and friends I don't want any visits. I thought it would be much more difficult for loved ones and friends than it would be for me, and that I would do okay. But no matter what, I've got to tell you, there's something in prison that's called blue light, and it's synonymous with love. Because when you go to I worked in the library. I was the prison librarian at the camp, and I got that position immediately, and it was a really much sought-after position, and everyone sort of laughed when I told them within a week that that's what I was getting. And it wasn't because I was special, but it was because it's right in the administrative building, and they could keep an eye on me that way, as well as the classes that I taught were close to the security area so they could monitor me. But there's something called blue love. And what it is when you go, every morning I would see young men in particular that would come into the computer room in the library and would go to their email just to see if there was a blue light. Because when you have an incoming email, a blue light shows up, and we call it blue love. And I can't tell you how many times a young guy would turn around and walk out and say, "No blue love today. No blue love today." So it's those little things. Now, I had a good amount of email exchanges and, Free Anonymous and political activists and Leann and lots of folks. Pam sent me postcards. I've got a collection of postcards that could go for a mile. So the other sad day for every inmate 5 days a week, especially in a camp where just before or after dinner is mail call. So you go to the front of the dorm, and the cops will break out the mail bags, and they'll call name after name after name after name after name, and the overwhelming majority of inmates don't get any letters, don't get any books, don't get any magazines. And for those of us who are getting 8, 10, 15, 20 postcards, letters, especially from all over the world every day, the joke was, whoop, must be Cohen's birthday again. So there are these little things. So I never felt forgotten. I never felt isolated. I never felt lost. In fact, at times I felt uncomfortable because I got to see from a very close-up position the faces of a lot of young men, either two kinds, either very young men in their early 20s or prisoners that were in their 40s and 50s who people had forgotten about them 20 years ago. And it's just day in, day out, the same routine, the same regimen. And, yeah, people feel that they have been lost or forgotten. I don't know any relationship with a loved one, no matter how hard people struggle and fight to keep them intact, that is not adversely impacted one way or another. It happens. But again, it's not by accident. It's by design. It's funny. I was looking at an article today. Obama's getting a lot of, credit again because once again he apparently commuted or reduced sentences of nonviolent drug offenders, and he's now all of a sudden up to a little bit less than 1,000 commutations during the course of 8 years as president, where the first 7 years of his presidency he commuted 88 sentences. And I wrote a piece for my blog that took a look at the criteria for commutation. And it turns out that the 1,000 people that he has now commuted or reduced sentences demographically matches about 40,000 federal inmates. So when you talk about releasing 88 or 100 or now 1,000 people, there are 40,000 women and men in federal prisons in the United States that match their demographics in terms of age, background, the nature of offense, what they have or have not done in prison. Why are they not getting released? If it's about demographics, they match it. So to answer the question that seemed to have started a while ago, there's a sense of isolation. But the most difficult part of the entire process for those of us that still have family that support us and love us and that we love and try to support, there's just so much you can't do. So that when you have a mother who's ill or a father who's lost their job or a son or a daughter who's having a problem with their boyfriend or girlfriend or got busted smoking pot or there's no money to pay the rent, or just one of a million there is nothing you can do. All you can do on a telephone is talk for 10 or 15 minutes and bite your tongue, clench your fist, and try to find the magic words. But no matter what you're saying, it's just not enough. And that's the worst part about it.
A very desperate situation by design.
Yeah.
Wow. Okay, now let's move a little more positive. And again, I'm curious what Leann has to say. What can people do? What can people do on the outside? People who are moved by the injustice, moved by the callousness and the inhumanity of the state. What can people do to help people like Matt and like you and your husband and, like everybody else who is facing this situation? What can people do to help? I'll ask all of you to answer that. Draw straws.
Leann, you there? Oh, there she is.
I'm here. Oh, my. My first thought in my mind is, what can they do? You look at poor Chelsea and you see what's happening to her. What can you do? And she's got thousands upon thousands of followers. But, writing, encouraging, supporting, for our family, it's a big deal. It is a big deal. Some days when it's really, really difficult and you think how overwhelming all of this is, somebody, I just had it today, somebody from Australia just checked in with me and said, we love you. We love you and your son. Thank you for your son. And I just stood there and it just made my heart smile, and I thought, this is good. Nobody gets enough encouragement. What people are doing, writing, it's really, really important. I can't stress how important it is to send letters, even like Pamela's postcards, just to let the person in prison, whether it be my son or Jeremy or Barrett or Chelsea or whoever that's in prison, to let them know that there are people on the outside that are thinking about them and supporting them and also to spread the information. I get so tired of people sticking their head in the sand and wagging their tongue and sticking their fingers in their ears and saying, oh, this isn't happening. Well, yeah, folks, it is happening. And it could very easily happen to you too. And so the more people that share it and the more the information gets out, I think that's a good thing. And that people are educated, that they know what's going on. In the case of my son, that these kinds of things happen. And like I said, it doesn't happen in a vacuum. There are a lot of people out there, the same things happening to them, maybe not on the level of having information of criminality against the government, but, they're investigating something, or God forbid, they're a good journalist, they're going to get targeted. So the more information that gets out and more people that know and understand what's going on, and that people just not sitting on their hands, but getting out and talking about things. And when someone asks for, to show up here to help, then do it.
Thank you. And, again, I think another problem that helps prevent people from helping is that there are so many crosstalkers out there that try and complicate things so much. But what I'm hearing from you, Leann, is just simply reach out, person to person. That could possibly mean the most to people who are imprisoned. It's just simply a recognition of simple humanity.
That's it,
be more
simple
valuable.
Humanity. Right.
Yeah.
Don't we as a group, and I'm sorry for that, don't we as a collective of people owe that much? Isn't it something that we can do so easily to say, we don't forget you. We know where you are, and we don't forget you, and we're here for you. Is it something that's so hard that someone like Matt should have to say, did they forget about me? Isn't it part of our duty as human beings to make sure that we do all that we can for a person who gave up his freedoms? I mean, I just don't see that it's so hard to do whatever we can, anything we can. And Leann happens to be my very special friend. Stanley Cohen is my forever hero. I spent a lot of time talking to Leann, and her heart is broken, but all she asks is to remember her son. I'm sorry, Leann. I'm sorry.
Let me again just, and I'm going to shift this because I want to thank God for, and I don't know whether she's a parking meter in Brazil or what, but I'm talking to Leann, we're talking to Sue, we've talked about Pam, we've talked about freeanons, we're talking about you folks just do incredible work. And I'll give you an example. When I was getting ready to leave prison, Leann reached out to me in one of her letters and said, hey, give me the name of a couple of guys that need to have people write letters. So I had become friends with a guy that, and the next thing I know, I gave Leann his name, and she sends a letter and says, "Hi, I'm Leann. How you doing?" Now, he doesn't know her from a hole in the wall. He doesn't know what her own personal crisis or problem is. She doesn't know him. But it's the letters. It's the postcards. It's at times raising money for the commissary. Let me give you an example of a little important step. I have a very dear friend of mine who lives in Gaza. And this is someone who I've communicated with for a very long period of time. And when I went to the federal prison camp, I was unable to communicate with them because they had no idea about core links. The prison email system, it's bad enough to be in Gaza and you don't have electricity and you can't charge your computer and you can't do this. So, I was able to reach out to a friend and say, listen, this is the email address for a friend of mine. Can you walk them through the core link process? And they did. And this is someone from Gaza who sent me 25 emails a week for 6 months, 7 months. So there are two separate answers to your question. One is the obvious, and it's what Leann has done and what Sue's done and what Pam's done and what freeanons has done. And I had people from all over the world writing me letters that I never knew and just, "Hi, how are you?" I had a letter from a campesino in Chile who had decided to quit med school and go to law school because of me. So there's that. Talk to them, reach out, holiday times, postcards, packages, all that good stuff, the love. I mean, it's important. But then the bigger question is, what can we do as human beings on the outside? And that is one of, my issues, is that the criminal justice system will only respond to friction. So people need to organize. People need to challenge government. People need to demonstrate. People need to support. People need to challenge the Bureau of Prisons. People need to challenge the Department of Justice. People need to make sure that lawyers, defense attorneys know what the hell they're doing when it comes to the federal criminal justice system, because a lot of them don't. People need to bring pressure to bear. There needs to be a discussion going on right now about why we have 2.5 million people in prison. And people need to understand, politicians need to understand, that as long as we are a country that is built on the backs of largely people of color, poor people, and political prisoners from largely urban America that are sent to rural communities to prop up failing Dust Bowl economies, there's a price to pay. And it means constant friction. So you have the two different steps. You have, what can I do as a human being to support someone who's in prison? Letters, postcards, packages, hellos, phone calls, emails, incredibly powerful, incredibly important, especially for young people and especially for people who've been in prison a long time. And then there's the issue of being friction under the machine on the outside. You can't just look at it and throw your hands up and say, "Oh, gee, it's business as usual. What can I do?" There's a lot you can do.
Very good. And again,
Glenn, one of the other things that you're doing, just you doing this show, is so helpful, and I hope lots of people are listening to it, because there are so many things we can do, and one of them is shows like these to help people to remember there are guys in prison, and they do need help, and they do need support, and they do need us to step up just a little bit and do whatever we can, and do what, like Stanley said, get out there and challenge the system. And until we do that and stop being keyboard warriors, then these sorts of things will continue. But so this show is as important as anything else that we can do, is keep exposing it until people listen and step up and agree that we need to do something to change it.
Well, thank you. I mean, I'm not even going to mention what I have done in the last 2.5 years on internet radio, what that's done for my personal relationship with my government. That's a whole nother issue. But, I mean, it's something that I believe very strongly in. Perhaps in another lifetime, perhaps I may have been familiar with the inside of those fences instead of the outside driving by. Perhaps. And, it's not that I ever got a real grasp of how terrible it can truly be, but a taste is a taste. And for people who are conscious and people who have humanity, it's not something you should ever forget. And this is the way that I try and give back. And, there's always more I could do myself. And this is just part of what I do to try and keep things moving, keep things topical, keep it in the public consciousness. Because, life will go on. The world will go on. It's probably almost guaranteed to not suddenly improve overnight. It's more likely to get worse, if you can believe it or not. But for the most part, life will go on in general. It's just a matter of what people in general will tolerate in that life. And, this is just doing what I can to get people to see some of the things that they either don't want to look at, or some of them really are genuinely not aware of them. But, 7 minutes left. I don't care how we fill it. But at this point, I just want to thank the three of you for coming on this show together. I've done probably almost 200 shows. I think this has been, in my opinion, the best show I've ever done, just because of the content and the personalities here. I thank all of you for making this show with me tonight.
Well, let me say this, Glenn, because you did a show with me maybe a week after I hit the streets. I was in a halfway house in the Bronx. Yeah. You have done incredible work, and Leann, you do incredible work because you not only are dealing with the personal pain of having a son who has been unjustly criminalized, incarcerated, and tortured, but you are also out there rebuilding people's hopes and aspirations. And Sue, I mean, I know the work you do and your colleagues and your comrades, and it's just incredibly invaluable work. The connection between political resistance, the connection between prison support work, the connection between playing an active role as friction on the machine is one. You can't compartmentalize it. The three of you, it's been my honor to be on this show with the three of you, and you've done 200 shows, Glenn. I don't know how many shows, speeches, engagements, written video, TV I've done over 30 years, but every time I end up on a show, what I consider to be an alternative show such as this, that raises the issues, that brings together people such as we've had on your show, I walk away with a smile on my face, knowing that we have hope, there is a future, we will struggle, we will survive, and things will get better.
That's a great attitude to have. That is the attitude of a fighter. Sue?
Absolutely.
Anything?
We love you too, Stanley.
Stanley's my main guy. All I can say is, Glenn, as always, thank you for taking the time to, bring up to discuss this really important subject. And it should be important to everybody because all of these things that we've discussed tonight could happen to them. And yes. I hope that they know that we will all be here for them, just like we are here now. And also, if I could direct everyone to the freeanons website, it is freeanons.org. We have a list of addresses up there for everyone. If you could take a moment to write a letter, it means the world. The addresses are there. All you need to do is just open it up, and all of them are together.
Definitely.
And Glenn, I want to say that. Oh, go ahead. I'm sorry.
Well, I was just going to say that I have a message from our little chat board we're using to run the day today. And Friendly Smoker says, "Tell Sue I love her."
And he knows I love him most of all. I love
Sue, you're cheating on me.
You know what, Stanley? You dumped me. You didn't want any part of me, but he might.
Oh, geez.
Top also says from London, hello to everyone, and he gives
Hi,
his support.
Top.
Yeah, hi, Top.
Go ahead, Leann.
What I wanted to say, Glenn, when I mentioned before about people who check in, and every time I ask a question and it doesn't matter, there's people all over the world. When I pop off and just ask a question, everybody's always there and always gracious, and you're one of those people, Glenn, and I just want to tell you thank you from the bottom of my heart. Thank you for inviting me to speak tonight. I really, really appreciate that. And my love to Stanley, because anytime I need something, he's right there, and he gives me his time, and I know how incredibly busy he is. And then
now look who's cheating.
and then lastly, to my exceptional friend Sue, who just lets me be a sounding board sometimes, and it's a good thing, and I love you truly, I do.
I love you too.
Can I get the last word in? I think is really fitting given what's going on today. I just want to say 3 words that I think will resonate to your entire audience given what's going on worldwide today. We are Legion.
Indeed we are. That is the basis of humanity. If only people would remember that. Actually, I thought the 3 words you were going to say were
Up the rebels.
Yes.
The rebels.
Yeah, I thought about that for a minute. But I'm a little bit burnt right now. I'm actually looking forward to Tuesday because I think it's going to be one of the most historical moments in American history.
What happened Tuesday? Tuesday. Oh,
yeah, I posed a question on Twitter today. I wondered whether the loser, whichever one it is going to take themselves hostage. I mean, it's just such an incredible freak show. Oh my!
That would be
God.
fitting, wouldn't it? That would be fitting.
It absolutely would. Lock themselves in the closet and threaten to do themselves in because it's rigged. Oh my God! Oh, please make it go away. End it. Ugh.
Soon,
I'm so sick of hearing about that bullshit.
Yes, very soon. Well, November 5th
Well, thank
is
you
known.
again.
Well, thank you all very, very much. I just want to say that November 5th has become known in the last 5 or 6 years as a day where people of different everything that is used to divide us can leave that behind and come together and find commonality. We don't have to agree on everything, but we can certainly talk about it even if we don't. That's something that's missing from the modern popular narrative. We have to regain it. It's the only way we're ever going to get out of this fucking hole. And it's possible because I've spent time with the 3 of you. And that just gives me hope for another, till next November 5th. I will carry on. I know all of you will carry on. And hopefully we've motivated some people out there to carry on.
I hope so.
Yeah, me too.
And thank you so much for letting us have the time to talk about this. And before we go, Stanley, I do love you best. I lied.
Thank you. Oh my God. It's funny at this point of my life.
You have too many women, don't you, Stanley?
Listen. At this point in my life, I'm sitting here with probably the most important woman in my entire life, which is Emma
I know
Rose.
her. We know Emma.
I just said her name, and she looked up at me from her dog bed filled with 87 different, fluffies, puffies, and she's looking at me because she's saying, "Dad, it's time for my broccoli." So what can I say?
Oh, Lord. Have a good night, everybody, and thanks again.
Yes, you
Thanks,
too.
Sue and Glenn.
Too.
And
love
Leann.
you guys.
My love to everyone. Thank you so much.
Love to all. Bye-bye.
Thanks,
you all.
Glenn.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
My pleasure. Thank you. All right, and now the fifth show, the final 3 hours in the Live on the 5 will be getting underway back on People